Please join us in welcoming Canadian Member of Parliament, Shuvaloy Majumdar, in conversation with Len Khodorkovsky to discuss how Western democracies can stand up to Tehran.
We're back. We are honored to have Canadian Member of Parliament, Shuvaloy Majumdar, with us. And I think there are a lot of Canadian Iranians, and I think it would be interesting for this audience and the audience watching us to get a perspective from Canada as to the relations between Canada and the regime and how where things are and where things are going. So first of all, thank you for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me, and that's a big question to open with. I'm a rookie member of parliament, elected twice in 2 years, but I have a history working on this file of Iranian freedom for about 19 years now, from the field and now in parliament. About a decade ago, I was an advisor in the government for Stephen Harper, where we closed the embassy because it was a front for terrorism. We rejected the Iranian diplomats inside Canada, and we embarked upon a massive series of programs in Iran and in support of transparency around nuclear inspections. Many events happened after 2015 when Justin Trudeau took over as Prime Minister in Canada, looking for rapprochement in Tehran rather than maximum pressure. It turned out that was not the will of the Iranian people or the source or the course of destiny. And ultimately, the Liberal government had to reconnect with the original ideas we had been pursuing 10 years prior. Today, Canada is now in an aftermath of an election and looking to chart its course for what that relationship with Iran would look like. Obviously, the region is massively disrupted. We know that we cannot trust the regime for its propaganda, for its promotion of terrorism, for its nuclear ambitions. And there's a lot of moving dynamics that I'm happy to get into. But the perspective from Canada generally at large is you have had historically a government that more recently has been looking to try and formalize relations with Tehran, and an opposition in the Conservatives who have been very suspicious of the regime from the very beginning.
I think I'd like to parse to what the government is doing and how the government views the regime versus how the people view the regime. It's always a theme that we have to remind ourselves that the Iranian government is not the Iranian people. Well, the same thing is true in every country. You know, there's how politicians view things, and then there's how average citizens view things. Iran has nearly 300,000 Canadian Iranians. Sorry, Canada has nearly 300,000 Canadian Iranians, and I'd be curious as to, let's put government aside and left or right, how does an average Canadian, Iranian Canadian or otherwise, view Canada's relationship with the regime?
Look, that's a complicated question, but let me be very clear. There was unanimous support in Parliament to list the IRGC as a terror organization. That meant all of Canada's political parties had a consensus that the IRGC is a terror front. Now, in Canada, we've had millions of dollars being snow-washed through our capital markets, our real estate markets, IRGC officials finding safe cover in places like Toronto. The regime's agents have been harassing not just members of the Iranian Canadian community, but have put at risk Canadian politicians and political leaders of different stripes. Legendary Liberal Justice Minister Irwin Cotler continues to live under house protection and close protection in Montreal. My Conservative Deputy Leader, Melissa Lantsman, had to maintain close protection for the balance of a better part of a year. I think when Canadians generally look at this, whether they are of Iranian descent or not, they find a lot of this foreign adventurism inside our country very troubling. There is a multi-partisan demand to confront and stop it, but a reluctance of actual government decisions to rout out IRGC operatives, to end snow-washing money, to end the terrorism that is not just happening inside Canada, the intimidation of our own people, but also the economy of carjackings that are financing Hezbollah and a variety of Iranian fronts. So in Canada, we have some serious problems when it comes to the regime's activities. My hope is, as we go back to Parliament next week, we can bring a lot of focus on not just fixing our country, but also supporting the freedom-loving people of Iran as well.
Let me pick up on that, on the Hezbollah point. Has the 12-day war and the decimation of Hezbollah by Israel, has that affected the kinds of activities the group has done on Canadian soil? Have you seen any of that, or is that still to be seen?
Nothing substantial as of yet. You know, we are watching events transform so radically across the Middle East since October 7th. In less than 2 years, the dynamic of the region has been completely upended. All of the assumptions that we have held about who holds power and how freedom is ordered in the region is now upside down. In so many ways, that is to the great thanks to the State of Israel for taking fearless decisions in defanging terrorism in their region as recently as this morning, and in demonstrating to the world the toothlessness of the Iranian regime in being able to protect itself. Now, what I think is sometimes lost in the plot, if I might, Len, is that Iran and Israel and the wider issue of IRGC and Iran's terrorism around the world is sometimes lost in the bigger story here. In so many ways, in the last decade, we've watched the People's Republic of China and Beijing underwrite and support Iran's and its regime's capacities, not just its nuclear capacities, its missile and drone capacities, its promotion of terrorism. And in this wider competition, even after the 12-day war, the greatest risk inside Iran is whether or not the Iranians are going to get support from Beijing in rebuilding their efforts in nuclear arsenal, but also their ballistic missiles and their drone capacities. My hope is that in Ottawa, that we realize that this world is getting incredibly competitive. And when it comes to our alignments in the democratic world, whether partnering with Europe, that sometimes has a pretty soft position toward Tehran, or Washington, which today is pursuing maximum pressure yet once again, that Ottawa gets that formulation right.
I think this idea of there are things that Iranian people can do to help themselves, and then there's what all of us on the outside can do. We heard E3 announce their intention to snap back sanctions on Iran recently. Hopefully they'll follow through on those things. What can Canada do to increase pressure on the regime to hold it accountable for not just nuclear advancement, but terrorism, hostage-taking, building missiles, and the whole, and certainly threatening Iranians or Canadians on Canadian soil? How can Canada increase the pressure on Iran?
Domestically, we can chase down IRGC officers, put them in prison, or deport them. We can shut down our borders to the snowwashing of capital that Iranian regime officials use to protect the riches they've stolen from the people. Internationally, Canada historically had supported to the tune of millions of dollars the inspections regime of IAEA inspectors to ensure that the Iranian compliance eventually could be witnessed. Now, we were always skeptical of the regime's intentions. We were supportive of the negotiations, but we wanted the negotiations to be meaningful by supporting the inspections regime and pursuing transparency. Canada has also launched a global dialogue for the future of Iran, creating space online for people of Iranian diaspora descent, but also inside Iran, to the tune of 4 million people, to dialogue with each other about what the future of the country could look like. It used circumvention software that was developed in Canada and was an alternative to an embassy, and how we maintained a dialogue with an incredible, historic, and wonderful people. I also think that when we think about how Iran is now looking at reestablishing itself after the 12-day war, whether it's through the ballistic program or others, Canada should be working with other partners to see how secondary sanctions can be imposed on entities that are actually supporting the reconstruction of the regime's terrorism. So there are many tools available. Finally, I mean, the United Nations is something that I have increasing skepticism of every single day, despite the aspiration of what is exhibited at the UN through the Cyrus Cylinder and its highest hopes. Pastor, I really appreciated what you said earlier about that. There is accountability every year on the Iranian regime that Canada used to lead, and it would be holistic effort around the world to talk about the regime and its predatory nature, to win support, to hold the regime accountable, and give voice to the people that have been suffering so badly underneath it. So many, many, many tools and ways in which Canada can modestly contribute to the cause of the Iranian people.
Well, one of the ways in which Canada has been at the forefront is designating IRGC as a terrorist organization. It seems obvious now, but it wasn't so obvious just a few years ago. And still, not enough Western countries or countries in the free world have done so. Why do you think they haven't? What is preventing the free world from calling a spade a spade?
Len, that's a huge question. I mean, there seems to be a complete inversion of moral values. Here we have a regime hell-bent on extremist rule, promoting it through unparalleled terrorism around the world, suppressing the rights of their own people, and looking to nuclearize themselves to commit a genocide in another part of the Middle East on the state of Israel. Meanwhile, just across the Gulf, you have another nation that has been pursuing massive internal reform, massive opportunities of education for its women, commercialization of its industries in Saudi Arabia. But if you go to the elites in the media, in the bureaucracy, the international bureaucracy, the academy, what you get is, well, Iran is a country that needs to be protected for its terrorism. But Gulf countries looking to normalize relations with Israel and provide stability should be punished because they're somehow fundamentalist. So to your question is my answer. Too often we start the story from the middle, not from the beginning. And in today's world where we have this inversion of an understanding of the realities of the region, it's time for the world to get a grip. It's time for the world to ally with the forces that are moving toward modernity over our medieval rivals, and that includes standing with the Iranian people for their freedom.
I'd like to take us back to 2020 when the regime shot down a Ukrainian Airlines flight with 55 Canadians on board and 30, I believe it was 30 permanent residents. So Canada felt the terrorism of the regime directly. But ironically, the regime has felt emboldened to try and intimidate the families of the victims, to try and disincentivize the world to holding them accountable, to inventing ways in which this was somebody else's fault. Is Canada doing enough to support the families of the victims? Where do things stand, 5 years since that happened? Is the regime any closer to being held accountable?
It's not, and in Montreal we have the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, where you can litigate the protections around commercial airlines and commercial flights. And PS 752 families have been petitioning Ottawa and their government to hold the regime accountable by taking the regime to court for how it used this flight as a civilian shield for protecting their terror apparatus. Sadly, we've not seen the kind of support that these families deserve. They're not being supported in resisting the regime's intimidation inside the country. And too often they are a footnote and a photo op rather than central to advocacy. I'm proud to come from a part of the country that actually has a very different attitude about them, whereas there can be no meaningful dialogue with Iran or the regime in Iran without actual accountability for the Canadians they murdered.
And finally, the free world seems to have tried a lot of ways to deter the regime. We've tried JCPOA, we've tried UN sanctions, we've put maximum pressure on the regime. And as the previous panel discussed, terrorism is in its DNA. It's not changing. It's not being deterred. Question is, we should give President Trump credit for putting the words regime change on the table. I think the United States government under the Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0 has probably gone farther than any other Western government to act on its words, first by eliminating Soleimani in 2020, then by U.S. striking the Iranian nuclear facilities, and then President Trump actually said, maybe there should be regime change in Iran. Should that be a legitimate option for Western governments, government in Canada? Is it past time for us to be able to, among other options, put regime change on the table?
Well, listen, at some point, Len, I'll have to tell you the story about how I met Qasem Soleimani in the Al Rashid Hotel in Baghdad in 2006. I had been working with an American organization, the International Republican Institute, trying to help people who believe in democracy win the tools to succeed in their country, not just in Iraq, but around the region, including in Iran. And that was, you'll remember, around the same time as a Green Revolution attempt. Listen, I have long held the view that international expectations of democratic reform in another country is not the same as democratic reformers realizing their own sovereignty, their own country. I think that the 12-day war was successful at degrading much of IRGC's capacity to control Iranian society. Much of the Basiji have been left to continue to thrive, and I understand exactly why Iranians of so many different ethnic faiths and perspectives are careful about how they want to remove their regime. I come from a party and a perspective that supports a change of regime in Iran. I come from the perspective that the regime has long outlasted its value and is not interested in long-term peace or stability, and is in fact the greatest threat to international peace and stability. I come from the perspective that the Iranian people deserve much better than what they have been afforded, and providing them tools and opportunities to organize and succeed needs to be a long-term approach for the Iranian people. But no foreign government can give to the Iranian people what they must wrest for themselves. And so when I think about the lion and the sun, it is time now for the lion to rise. It is time now for the sun to rise. And it is time for the IRGC to understand that they are the prey, not the predator.
I can't imagine a better way to finish our conversation. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you for your time.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you all for being here as well. Thank you.